Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Media, and I want to wish you all a happy new year and welcome to 2021. So I know that I have not done a lot of videos in 2020 with all of the things happening and everything going on. I know everybody found 2020 a very challenging year, so I did as well. So I did not get to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do for the channel. But in that time, I have been doing some things kind of behind the scenes. So if you're a longtime subscriber to the channel, you'll know that I actually had two Freenas machines. One was a 4-core 16 gig machine, and the other was a 12-core 32 gig machine. So those two Freenas servers have been retired for two reasons. One reason is that they were really power inefficient. One was an old Opteron with a 750 watt power supply, and the chips they're not very efficient, right? They generated a lot of heat. So that was one thing that I wanted to get rid of, was all that heat that was being generated. The other thing is that Freenas is no more. There is Freenas. You still can get the ISO for it, but really now you want to be moving and migrating your stuff to Truenas. Truenas Core is the new Freenas, so it's the entry-level Freenas, so not the enterprise version of Freenas, which is Truenas, but the kind of the open source community version of Truenas is now Truenas Core. So that's one thing. The other thing is that when I did this build, I took the two machines that I had. They were in two separate cases. One was a case that I really hated because it had horrible thermal design. It's a little Norco 8-bay mini ITX case. That case is horrible. Never ever buy that case. It looks like it'd be great for a little tiny Freenas box, but it's a horrible case for thermals. I had 3 terabyte drives in there, and they were hitting like 60C like all the time. They were just being choked out. So the only way I would even suggest you wanting to use that Norco excuse me, case would be if you were going to do SSDs, if you were going to do, SSDs in the drive bays, or you were going to do 2.5-inch drives in the drive bays, or you were going to do like 5400 drives that rarely spin up. So, and the weird thing is that case has 2 fans in it. It has two 90mm fans on the back of it, and there's just not enough airflow to come through the front and blow over the drives and get pulled through the back. There's just not enough. And the other thing about it that some people would find very annoying is that case uses a 1U Flex ATX power supply. And if you know, normally those are very loud because those are used in 1U servers, and they have two very small, I think 40mm fans on them, and they're usually running at a very high RPM, so they sound like airplanes taking off. I did a hack on that 1U power supply because it wasn't a very hot environment for the power supply. I disabled one of the fans and it worked fine. But just know that case is probably a horrible thing to build in. So as I decided to build a new Truenas server, I decided to build on this platform. So if you've never seen this case before, this case, to me, I like the very, kind of corporate looking box, but this is truly a massive computer. Now this case does not come assembled. It comes disassembled, so you have to assemble this case. But the really cool thing is that it's huge, right? So one of the big reasons why I chose to go with this case over buying a bunch of rack mounted cases is that I would have to buy a rack for one, and then 2, I would have to buy some rack computers, like a 4U rack machine, and 2 of those, like a really good rack case, like a really good 4U case, if it had removable hard drive trays in it, would run me about $300. I would need 2 of those. So that'd be like 600 right there. And then I also need a rack, whether I'm going to do a rolling rack or an open mount, open frame, 2-post rack. That's still going to be maybe another $200. So I was looking at $800 for case and no computers yet. So that was just case spending. So I decided to go with the Thermaltake W200. I think it's a fantastic case. It's huge. It's very reminiscent of the Case Labs case. In the same vein, Case Labs used to make a dual system case just like this. I don't say the weird, but the interesting thing about it is on this side, your motherboard sits in the normal configuration with the IO ports on the top. On the other side, on this side over here, you can see there is a tray. So there's a tray right here, and the motherboard on this side of the case is inverted, which is kind of weird, but it doesn't really affect anything. I mean, it works the same way. It's just one side it's inverted and the other side it's normal. You have a power supply down here on both sides, and then on the front you have connections for each. So you have USB USB 3 ports on the front. There's no USB-C on the front, but you have power and reset buttons for each one of your systems, which is pretty cool. And then over here on this side, these are removable. So what I've done is I've placed 2 4 bay drive cages, so 8 bays. And what I've done, I fill those with 10 terabyte Seagate Helio Exos drives. So right now, that's what's rocking in this. So what I've done is I've basically built 2 systems like I had before. They're based off of these are just AMD Ryzens. So the one reason why I went with the Ryzen, and this, as you can see, this is the other thing that I decided to do was to virtualize everything. So as you can see right now, I'm using Proxmox. So Proxmox is a hypervisor. It's a bare bone hypervisor. So what that lets you do is you can install Proxmox, and then you can run instances much like you would do inside of like AWS. So I can take the computer, I can take this one machine and slice it up into other machines, and they can all run and be shut down and do all that stuff independently of each other, right? So that makes it really cool that I have basically a home lab in a box. So I could run additional Windows, I can run a Windows operating system, and if I were to install video cards in it, and if you've ever seen videos such as like Linus Tech Tips videos, he's done 6 gamers, 7 gamers, 1 computer. He was using Unraid. So Proxmox is kind of the same type of idea, right? So Proxmox is a hypervisor that you install, and then from that hypervisor you're able to install other operating systems. And you can install any operating systems you want to. You can install OS X, you can install whatever. But the advantage of using Proxmox is that if I wanted to install Windows and I wanted to have an actual video card, not a virtual video card, but a real video card connected to that instance, I'm able to use a method called PCI pass-through and pass through PCI devices from the actual computer to the virtual machines, which is what I'm doing with Truenas. I actually have, if I look at this, you can see right now I'm running Truenas, and if I go here to hardware, I have this PCI device right here, this host PCI device, and it is being passed through to the virtual machine. So to the virtual machine, it is a real piece of hardware. Now that PCI device that I'm passing through is an Adaptec 16 port mini SAS controller. So I'm able to pass that through to Truenas. And the other thing that's really cool is I can see the console. So instead of having to go and connect a computer to the console or to that computer, I can see it by just logging into my Proxmox hypervisor and then looking at the console itself. So I can see the console. I can shut I could shut down Freenas, reboot it, and be able to do all of that from this virtual console. So I don't need another monitor to be able to do this, and I can do this from any machine on my network at home. So that's really cool too. So I installed Proxmox, and then I installed Truenas, and you can still see it's still based off of FreeBSD, right? But if I go to this web interface, so if I go here, and I'm going to go to this web interface, and I'm going to pull that up real quick. Here we go. So I'm at that. So if I log in now, you can see this is Truenas. So Truenas is running. You can see I've got 6 threads. If I go back to Proxmox, you will see, if I look at the top summary of this, you'll see what I did. I gave it, so this is a Ryzen 1700X. So it's a 16 core processor. The machine has 32 gigs of, has 64 gigs of RAM total. So I gave 32 gigs of RAM to Truenas, and I also gave Truenas 6 cores. So I still have, 10 cores left over that I can run additional instances with. And if I still have 2 PCI Express slots open. I can install 2 video cards, so I could run 2 other machines off of this same hardware. And that's only one side of this super server, right? So I'm virtualizing these things. At first, I didn't know how Freenas would work virtualized, but it's pretty much the same as it would be if it was not virtualized, right? I haven't had any issues with anything. I did have an issue in the beginning when that was more of a hardware thing where I was getting hot on the CPU itself, and that was just because the cooler wasn't seated properly onto the chip. But other than that, everything is working fantastically. You don't see the platform because this is virtualized. It doesn't see the platform, but it does. I can pass through the fact that it's a real AMD Ryzen 1700X, and I can still see the data usage. I can see thread usage. I can see temperatures on the hard drives, and so everything for the most part works just as if it was installed to a bare metal machine. I feel like that virtualizing Truenas is, especially if you are going to go for density, is really, it's important to do it this way. It's important to basically, freaking virtualize it. It's awesome. You can see this thing's been up and running for 19 days. I haven't had any problems. The only times that I have restarts is when I have manually restarted the system, and that's it. You can see for this new build, I have 4 drives in here. So this is a Pool 5. It's a RAID 5Z basically. So I've got 4 disks with the ability to lose 1 disk and still keep all of my data. So this pool here has nothing on it yet. So this is a brand new clean pool, which has, the same thing. I've got 4 10 terabyte drives, and one of them I can lose 1 and still be able to keep my data. And I'm fine with that. The thing that I have on this drive here is basically stuff that I use. They're just movies and TV shows that are being served up on Plex. So that's all that is. And then this right here is going to be used more for business. I do video editing. So I'm probably, I do a video editing on the side, right? But what I'm probably going to do is set part of this up as an iSCSI network drive. And I've done that in the past, and I can do a new video on how to do that when I do it with this. But it's really pretty much the same. So let's look at some other features of what going from Freenas to Truenas gets you. One, you have a brand new, I think this is a really good user experience. It's clean. The information you need is right there. It's awesome. When you go down here and look at your plugins, this is a little bit different, but kind of the same, right? So as you can see, I'm running a Plex server. So I've got Plex up and running. So think about that. I'm using Proxmox as the hypervisor. I containerized Truenas, and then inside of Truenas, I'm running a jail, which is basically a virtualized, version of Plex. So it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll. I'm nesting things inside of each other. So I've got Plex running on this, and that's all I have running on this guy right now. And if you see here for plugins, you have the official IX Systems plugins, which is like, this Agora Backup, Iconic, Minio, NetCloud, and then the Plex servers, and then SyncThing, and then Tarsnap. And then you have the community. You have these community plugins. This goes back to, I think, Freenas 9.3 or 9.2. You had community-based plugins, and I think that went away in the next version. I think like 9.4, and I know it was gone in I think 10 and 11. There was, well, we don't talk about 10, right? But I think this was gone. So they've brought back this ability to have plugins that the community's made and that you can deploy. Now, I will tell you, I tried to deploy this Calibri web and it did not work. So I have not tried all of these. I'm going to go through probably one by one and try these and see if all of these work. Transmission does work. I do have transmission working on another version. The other one thing that I will say here with these, this Openvpn server, don't use this at all. And I'll show you why you don't want to use that, because there's been some changes to Truenas core. But going back to the Calibri web, Calibri is kind of like an ebook organizer. So you can have all of your ebooks there, and you can plug in your ebook reader and be able to keep your library organized, right? I use it all the time on my PC. So I was like, it'd be really cool to have that on our network, and then you could access this library of books from anywhere. Tried to install this, it didn't work. Of course, knowing Dr. Media, I went and I built my own jail. So if you're interested in seeing how to get Calibri web running in a jail inside of Freenas, I'll make a video on that if you all want to, if the community wants to see that, because it was pretty simple. It was pretty easy to do. It wasn't that hard. But it's cool because now I have Calibri web running on the network, and I can look at that on any device on my tablet or whatever. I can download that book directly to my device and then view it later, which is really awesome. So the reason why I was saying with Openvpn, because this is something I think is really, if you don't have, and I do, I have an OpenSense router, which is once again based off of FreeBSD, but it is a router appliance. I have that on my network. So that handles all of my network traffic. It handles my DNS. Well, it handles part of my DNS routing. It handles everything from my network. So I built a firewall, which is another thing I can cover in a project if you want to see that. And I have Openvpn installed onto my firewall router, right? So I can access my network from anywhere in the world by using Openvpn, and I don't need anything special to do that. And it's a secure connection. It is encrypted between myself and back to my home server, and it works fantastic, and it's free to use. So what they've done here with Truenas, if I go in here to services, you'll see they've added Openvpn Client and Openvpn Server. So if you don't have a network firewall with Openvpn, with an Openvpn server on it, you can now run an Openvpn server directly on your Truenas box which is freaking awesome. That will be able to give you access if you use something like dynamic IP or no IP or something like that. You will be able to access all of your stuff on your Freenas box, on your Truenas box. I got to get used to saying Truenas, on your Truenas box from anywhere, which is pretty freaking awesome. Not that you couldn't do that before, right? There were ways to do that. You could set up a TFTP server. You could do a WebDAV server. You could even do, FTP if you wanted to. But this right here, I think, is a game changer of being able to do OpenVPN on this box and have it run. So you have to do a lot of stuff. You've got to set up a certificate authority. You've got to set up basically a certificate, and that certificate, you would put that certificate on your device. And when you logged in to log into this OpenVPN, it would ask for that certificate. It would make a secure handshake over SSL, and it would be like, okay, now all the data over this connection is encrypted, and you have access to your TrueNAS infrastructure. So I think that is freaking awesome. So I've done that, and like I say, I've been using that for a while, and I think it's one of the best things to be able to do if you want to, of course, access your stuff outside of your home, right? Like, so if you want to be able to access this stuff and get to it, I think that's like the best way to be able to do it. Because in that machine, I told you, I've got two servers set up inside of that machine. So if I go here, you'll see this Proxmox. There's only one thing running on it right now, which is Truenas, my bigger server. And then I also have another Truenas box. And when I was doing this, it was still Freenas. So it is Truenas as well now. So if I go here, I can go look at my other Truenas server, and it's got a few other things running on it. So if I go here, you can see, boom, this one's different. This is .230, this is .17, and I can log into this guy, and then you can see on this one is running a Ryzen 1600. I'm gonna switch this out because I have another 1700 chip around here, so I'm gonna switch the 1700 into this. Now you might say, well, Dr. Media, why would you want to do a 1700 instead of the 16? The 16 still, 6 core, 12 threads. Well, the reason why I wanted to do it is that the 1700 and the 1600 have the same thermal output, which is 65 watts. So I'm not going to generate any more heat by using the faster chip with more cores. The other thing is I have more cores, so I would be able to run more virtual machines. So on this, you can see on this node, I have TrueNAS running, and I also have this PXE server running. So I have a Pixie server running. And this is pretty cool because this Pixie server, if I want to make copies of a machine on the network, I can boot to Pixie. This server will pick it up and it will let me, save an image. So I can save a disk image. I can restore a disk image. And this is just always running because this is not using very many resources. I gave it 2 CPUs and I gave it a gig of RAM because it's not doing anything. I've actually got a spot on the network that's saving my, my backups to. So I can actually, if I bring this over, you can see that this TrueNAS here, this .230, this is my hard storage. And you can see I've got a couple of images that I've actually saved of my computers by using the Pixie server. So this Freenas box here is running a little bit more stuff. If I go here to my plugins, you can see I've got NetCloud running on this, I've got Sync Thing running on this, and I've got Transmission running on this. One thing that's really cool too with Truenas Core is that now I can use NAT. So you'll see that I'm not making separate IP addresses for all of these other plugins. I'm using different ports. So like NetCloud, it's the same IP address, it's just a different port. This is on port 8282, this is on port 8384, and then this is on port 9091. So these are all accessible by going to, you know, .20.230 and then changing the port assignment at the end of it. This makes organizing this really makes organizing all of my plugins a lot easier than before. And if I go here to jails, you'll see that I actually have a jail that I call ebook. This is a jail that I set up myself, and because I set this jail up on my own, that's why it doesn't show up in your plugins, because it's not a plugin. So that's that. But I really enjoy this new setup, having both computers inside of one chassis. This computer is actually quiet enough now that I can bring it back into my office, and it sits under the table at the back of my office. The case is massive, and as you saw, you know, there's fan slots. I've got four fans in the front. So this is kind of how my configuration is. I've got these inside drive bays on the right hand side, and these hold 3 terabyte. Like I have 8 3 terabyte drives in this particular configuration. And then on the other side, I've got those 8 drive bays, and I've got those 8 10 terabyte drives on this side. And I've got 4 fans in the front, which are great, and I'm thinking of adding additional fans. So you can see your fan support is, once again, it's massive as well. And I am using the Thermaltake fans. I went with blue, so I think the black and blue looks really good together. And so this right here, I've got 4 fans in here, but then you've got fan racks. You've got these racks right here. So you could install, you know, all-in-one water coolers. There's a 120, 140 millimeter fan on the back. So you could do an AIO. You could do a 240 rad AIO if you wanted to, which is something I'm thinking about, but I'm gonna stick with air cooling this. And you've got racks on top. So this top piece comes off, and you've got space for 16 more fans. And then there's also a bottom to this. The thing that's really cool about this case, I don't think people kind of slept on this case, but you can also buy this bottom to put on to that same case, to that WP200. This is the bottom of it, and you can put other stuff in here. So you could put more fans in here, you could put your water cooling stuff in here, or you could do like this, and you could put additional drives in here. So you can do more drives. And the really cool thing that I like is that I was able to bring in, I bought an Adaptec SAS controller. Sorry, my mind, I'm slipping. I bought an Adaptec SAS controller, and the reason why I bought that over the LSI one that I had, the LSI one is like a first generation SAS controller. So this is something that you need to look out for when you're looking for SAS controllers for your Freenas or your Truenas builds rather. Is the one I had was it was a first generation LSI controller. So it had SAS connections. The issue that I ran into is that when I tried to connect those 10 terabyte drives to that SAS connector, it did not understand them. So it was able to use 2 terabytes of the 10. So it only saw 2 terabytes because first generation SAS controllers, that's all they're able to see is up to 2 terabytes. I think 2, maybe 3, right? But it can't see a 10 terabyte drive. That's the issue. So I found an Adaptec 16 port. So the ones that I had was 8 port. So I found a 16 port mini SAS controller, and that's what I have running in this box now. So you can see if I go here and look at disks, and let's see, I'm gonna my storage disks, right? You can see these are properly seen. So they're seen like they should be, and this works fine. So I've got 8 drives in here. I could do 8 more drives, right? I could add an additional 8 drives. And if I did do that, I would buy this bottom expansion and add them to the bottom of the case, and to keep them spread out. The other reason why I chose the WP200 is because of airflow. Airflow is a lot better in this case. It doesn't generate much heat. The components they're not server components, they're desktop components. I went with the Asus ROG Strix motherboard. And you might be like, well, Dr. Media, why'd you use a gaming motherboard in your server setup? Well, quite frankly, the motherboard is only $129. So it's $129, supports 64 gigs of RAM. It had like 6 PCI Express, like 3 PCI 16 ports, and then 2 PCI 1. So it had a lot of expansion. It had really more expansion than I'm gonna probably use. It's got RAID built into the motherboard itself. It's got 6 SATA ports on it, which that goes into something I'm going to add in here. I'm going to add a 1 slot 2.5 bay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a 1 slot 2.5 bay in here that will hold up to 6 2.5 inch drives, and I'll probably do 2 terabyte drives. So that'll give me like 6 terabytes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign those disks directly to Proxmox, and I'll just do 6. So I'll have 3 for one computer and 3 for the other computer, and I'll, it'll work fine. It'll actually work really well, and I can just use regular SATA to connect those to the motherboard. So that motherboard was fantastic, and that motherboard will support up to 3rd generation Ryzen. So I have 1st generation Ryzen in it right now. So I have an upgrade path for these. If I feel like the 1700s are getting slow, which they won't, I won't feel that way, because the 1700X is still a very comparable CPU from AMD even after almost 4 years. It's still something that I would use. But I replaced the 1700s with 2700s, and I'm replacing those with, if I can find them, like 5000 series, right? But 64 gigs of RAM for each one of these. The only thing that I probably, once again, I have an upgrade path. This is a XL ATX, so an eATX case. If I wanted to, I've got a couple of Threadripper chips sitting around. I could do Threadripper. I have a 1950X that I could put in here. Of course, changes the motherboard, but I could put a 1950X in here with 128 gigs of RAM and be able to run a whole bunch of instances. But I don't really need that. For my needs, these 2 servers together work out really well. One has a 750 watt power supply, and the other one has an 850 watt power supply. And it's not because, the only reason why I have an 850 watt power supply is because I had that laying around and I didn't have to buy it, right? So the only parts that I bought for this build was the case, the motherboards, and the RAM. And the RAM is just, regular 3200 RAM. It's not anything fancy. It doesn't have RGB because it's a server, right? I don't need all of that. But hopefully you've enjoyed this overview of, Proxmox. I'm going to be doing more videos on what Proxmox is and how you can use it. And then I'm also going to be doing more videos on Truenas. Now that Freenas has become Truenas, some people might be like, well, things are different now. How do I find these things? Well, things are not that different. So I'll be hopefully I'll be a guiding hand as we go through those things. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, hit that subscribe button and remember to click that bell so you get notified when I have new videos come out. And have a happy and healthy 2021. Until next time, Dr. Media out.